The ocean is a place of wonder but also of sudden terror. From Navy divers dragged into the deep to tourists caught in predator-rich shallows, icy fjords haunted by ancient giants, and warm reefs patrolled by ruthless hunters, these true stories reveal how quickly calm seas can turn into chaos. Watch till the end, because each account shows the thin line between survival and tragedy in the world's most dangerous waters. In August 2020, the sea off Gansbaai, South Africa, shimmered under the morning sun as a U.S. Navy unit prepared for a demanding drill. Among the divers was Petty Officer Daniel Harris, a 29-year-old sailor who had built his life around discipline, service, and courage. Born in Virginia, he had grown up near the Chesapeake Bay, where boats, fishing, and open water shaped much of his early childhood. His father had served in the Marines, and his mother was a teacher who encouraged his interest in both athletics and reading. By the time he reached adulthood, Daniel had earned a place in the Navy, training tirelessly to become one of the most reliable divers in his crew. He was known for calm focus under pressure and the physical strength to endure long hours beneath the surface. His comrades trusted him, often relying on him during complicated exercises where others might hesitate. This particular drill was meant to simulate the recovery of a capsized life raft. The scenario was designed to prepare them for real rescues during storms, shipwrecks, or combat situations, where every second could mean the difference between life and death. The waters chosen for the practice were rough, filled with unpredictable currents and swirling debris. Daniel had volunteered to swim ahead, eager to inspect submerged wreckage that had been placed below to mimic a real disaster site. His movements through the heavy water were strong and confident, his breathing steady as bubbles rose to the surface. Above him, the crew on the support vessel monitored the divers closely, unaware that the area carried more danger than staged hazards. The exercise stirred up schools of distressed fish, their silver bodies flashing as they darted through the water. The splashing and vibrations carried farther than the team realized, sending signals into the deep. From below, a shadow began to form. A massive great white shark, more than 21 feet in length, had been circling the area. Drawn by the scent and sound of struggling fish, it rose with incredible speed. Daniel, scanning the wreckage with focus, had no warning before the strike came. In an instant, the predator surged upward, its massive jaws locking around his leg and torso in one crushing bite. The force pulled him off balance, his body twisting violently as the water erupted into foam and red. His dive gear rattled loose as he was dragged downward. The impact was so sudden that his teammates froze for a moment before panic set in. They surged forward, striking at the beast with metal poles and thrashing their fins in an attempt to scare it away. The water boiled with chaos, but the predator's grip was unyielding. Daniel fought with all the strength in his body, kicking and pulling, but the weight of the animal was overwhelming. His movements grew frantic as the shark thrashed, dragging him farther from the group. Divers struck at the broad head again and again, but the creature's raw power only pulled him deeper, ripping him from their reach. Above the surface, the support vessel erupted into alarm. Crew leaned over the rails, shouting as they watched the battle unfold below. Ropes were thrown and equipment readied, but the distance and violence beneath made rescue impossible. The training drill had transformed in seconds into a nightmare no one could stop. The last sight many caught of Daniel was his dark wetsuit twisting in the froth before being dragged into the darker blue below. The sea closed over him as bubbles and blood spread across the waves. The shark vanished with him, leaving behind shaken divers and horrified sailors on the deck who could do nothing but stare. The water grew still again, but the silence was heavy. In place of a routine exercise stood the memory of violence that ended faster than anyone could comprehend. The fragments of gear floating to the surface told the grim truth. Daniel's fight had been lost to the deep, and the ocean had claimed him in front of those who cared most. The sea off Gansbaai had grown quiet again, but the silence on the vessel was heavier than any storm. Divers returned to the deck one by one, their faces pale and their bodies shaking. They knew the moment was over, but the weight of what they had just witnessed pressed down like stone. The equipment Daniel had been carrying floated up in pieces, his mask cracked, and fragments of his wetsuit drifting like reminders of what had been lost. The crew stood frozen, staring at the red stains still swirling on the surface, unable to accept that their strongest teammate had been taken in seconds. Search operations began almost immediately. Boats circled the area, casting nets and dragging lines in hopes of finding anything that remained. Sonar scanned beneath the waves, marking shapes that vanished as quickly as they appeared. For hours, divers re-entered the water with heavy hearts, moving through the depths with ropes and lights. But the sea revealed little. Only torn fabric and scattered gear were recovered, small pieces that could not explain the force of what had happened. The vastness of the ocean left more questions than answers, and each passing hour deepened the realization that Daniel would not return. Back on land, the Navy prepared an official report. Commanders gathered statements from every witness, documenting the violent speed of the event and the helpless struggle to intervene. Experts reviewed the conditions, noting how the wreckage and distressed fish created the perfect lure for a predator. The conclusion was clear. Even the most skilled divers with years of training and discipline were not immune to the raw unpredictability of nature. The exercise had been designed to teach survival, but it had turned into a demonstration of vulnerability that none would ever forget. The impact reached far beyond the immediate team. News spread quickly through the military community, where Daniel was known for his steady leadership and quiet determination. His family received the devastating news that his body had never been recovered, leaving them with grief sharpened by the lack of closure. Tributes began to pour in from colleagues who remembered him as more than a sailor. He was a friend, a brother, and a man whose courage inspired those around him. The Navy held a memorial at sea, lowering wreaths into the water where he had vanished, the waves carrying their sorrow out toward the horizon. For his fellow divers, the memory became a lasting scar. Training no longer felt routine, and every drill carried echoes of the moment when steel poles struck against a predator that refused to let go. The ocean, once their arena of control and discipline, now held a shadow they could not erase. Daniel's name lived on in the halls of his unit, etched into both honor and warning. His story reminded all who entered the water that skill and strength could never guarantee safety, and that beneath the surface, the sea always holds the final word. In October 2018, the coastline of Mozambique was alive with warmth and color as tourists gathered near Tofo Beach, a place famous for coral reefs, mangrove channels, and rich marine life. Among the travelers was 31-year-old Jonas Weber, a German tourist who had always been drawn to adventure. Back home, he was known as someone who loved the outdoors, often cycling, hiking, and exploring new places whenever he could. His passion for the sea was strong, and kayaking across tropical waters had been a dream for years. The trip to Mozambique gave him the chance to live that dream, and he joined 4 close friends for a morning journey across the shallow reefs. The group was cheerful as they launched their kayaks, laughing and talking as they paddled side by side. The ocean shimmered under the sun, calm on the surface but alive with hidden activity below. The shallow reefs created a scenic pathway, dotted with coral heads and schools of small fish darting beneath their boats. Jonas paddled with energy, feeling both free and at peace as the kayak glided smoothly over the turquoise water. For him, this was more than just sightseeing. It was a way to escape routine and immerse himself in the beauty of nature. As time passed, the group drifted farther from shore than they had planned. The reefs stretched wide, and the kayakers followed them without noticing how far the beach was behind them. Beneath the surface, baitfish moved in tight schools, flashing silver in the sunlight. These small creatures attracted much larger hunters, but from the surface, the friends saw only ripples and swirls that seemed harmless. The mood remained light, with splashes of paddles breaking the silence of the sea. Then, without warning, everything changed. From below, a massive shadow surged upward with explosive force. A tiger shark over 13 feet long rammed Jonas's kayak with such power that it tipped violently, throwing him into the water. The impact sent his paddle spinning away and his body plunging beneath the surface before he could react. His friends gasped in horror, their kayaks rocking as they scrambled to turn toward him. The shark wasted no time. With terrifying speed, it clamped its jaws around Jonas's torso, thrashing side to side in a burst of raw strength. The water erupted with foam, blood spreading quickly into the clear shallows. Jonas struggled, his limbs thrashing, but the predator's grip was unbreakable. His friends screamed and struck at the surface with their paddles, splashing and banging in a desperate attempt to distract the shark. The kayaks tilted dangerously as they moved closer, their owners swinging wildly with every ounce of strength. But the predator was relentless. Its powerful body dragged Jonas deeper, twisting and shaking him with such force that the others could only watch in shock. The once bright reef became a scene of chaos. filled with broken paddles, scattered gear, and red-stained water. The kayakers screamed for help, but the vast sea offered no answer. The minutes stretched, every second filled with terror, as Jonas disappeared beneath the waves in the grip of the beast. His friends fought the impossible fight, their arms burning with exhaustion as they tried to save him. Yet the ocean, ruled by one of its strongest hunters, showed no mercy that day. The reef around Tofo Beach grew quiet after the chaos, leaving only the broken outlines of kayaks and the frightened cries of those who survived. The friends clung to their boats in shock, staring at the crimson trail that spread wider across the water. Their paddles, bent and splintered, floated aimlessly beside them, reminders of their desperate but powerless attempts. The sea, moments before alive with laughter, now carried the heavy silence of loss. For what felt like hours, the group remained adrift, too afraid to move far, still hoping against hope that their friend might surface again. The vast horizon offered no comfort, only an endless stretch of blue that swallowed the last evidence of Jonas's struggle. When the rescue team finally arrived, guided by frantic distress calls, they found the survivors pale, trembling, and clutching at their battered kayaks. The torn gear was lifted onto the deck, and blood-stained paddles were gathered with grim faces. There was no trace of the missing man. On shore, the news spread quickly. Local authorities began their investigation, marking the area as one of heightened danger. Marine experts explained that tiger sharks are opportunistic hunters, drawn easily to splashing or the presence of baitfish, especially in shallow waters. For those left behind, the explanation did little to ease the pain. The group of friends gave their statements with heavy voices, each word carrying the weight of what they had seen. The aftermath was marked by grief that reached far beyond the beach. Jonas's family, thousands of miles away, received the devastating message that he would not be returning home. Tributes poured in from friends and colleagues who remembered his adventurous spirit and kind nature. His love for the outdoors, once a source of joy, had led him into a moment of tragedy none could have imagined. Locals and tourists gathered in the days that followed, bringing flowers to the shoreline as the waves lapped quietly against the sand. Conversations turned somber as warnings were posted for others to stay close to shore and avoid venturing into predator-rich waters without caution. The image of kayaks drifting back without one of their own left a mark on everyone who witnessed it. Though the ocean carried on as it always had, those who were present would forever see it differently. What began as a joyful adventure ended as a haunting reminder of how quickly beauty can turn to horror when humans enter the world of powerful predators. On September 4, 2024, the towering oil rigs off Gansbai rose from the Atlantic, surrounded by deep water that hid both promise and danger. Among the crew working that day was 34-year-old diver Peter van Rensburg, a seasoned professional who had spent over a decade in offshore industries. Known for his calm nature, he had built a reputation for taking on difficult underwater tasks, always prioritizing precision and safety. Alongside him was 29-year-old engineer Marika Vogel, one of the youngest on the team, yet already respected for her knowledge of machinery and her ability to be composed even under pressure. Their assignments often took them below the surface, where they inspected structures and monitored signs of wear caused by salt and current. That morning they prepared for another routine descent, joined by a fellow technician whose role was to support their survey work. The water was calm, but experience had taught them never to take that for granted. Each donned a wetsuit and harness, tightening every strap carefully before stepping off the platform and into the ocean. Their gear shimmered faintly under the surface as they descended along the rig's beams. The task seemed straightforward: record any corrosion, document the growth of barnacles, and prepare a log for upcoming repairs. For Peter, it was the kind of work he had grown used to, and for Marika, it was another chance to prove her skills in a field still dominated by older workers. At first, everything seemed normal. Schools of fish darted between the metal structures, brushing past their lights as they shone beams over bolts and panels. The sounds of their breathing echoed softly with a calm and steady rhythm. But below them, shadows stirred, drawn by the noise and movement spreading through the water. From the blue gloom, a vast outline materialized. A great white shark measuring more than 20 feet rose with terrifying speed. Its presence was unmistakable, its size dwarfing the divers as it cut through the current. Before anyone could react, it lunged directly at Peter. The predator's jaws clamped around his leg, shaking him with crushing force. The sudden strike sent shockwaves through the water, and his equipment rattled as pain coursed through him. Marika reached instinctively toward him, only to find herself in danger as the predator veered and snapped at her arm. The impact spun her around, scraping her against the steel beam she had been inspecting. Blood mingled with the water, drawing the predator closer as it circled for another strike. Above the surface, the rest of the crew noticed the commotion. Shouts rang out as they scrambled to respond. Poles slammed into the water and emergency flares streaked across the waves, sending bursts of light below. The noise and bright flashes broke the predator's focus, forcing it to veer away for brief moments. The divers struggled upward, dragging Peter's wounded body toward the rig's ladder. Marika kicked hard, her injured arm heavy, every second feeling longer than the last. The predator circled once more, its massive tail cutting the water, but the chaos above drove it back into the depths. Hands reached down from the platform, gripping them firmly and hauling them aboard. Peter's face was pale, his wetsuit torn, and his leg bleeding heavily. Marika collapsed beside him, clutching her arm, her eyes wide with shock. The third diver, though shaken, had managed to escape with only scratches. What had begun as routine maintenance had turned into a desperate fight against one of the ocean's most powerful hunters. The deck of the oil rig became a scene of urgency as workers scrambled to stabilize those who had been pulled from the water. Peter lay motionless, his body trembling as blood pooled beneath him. His leg bore deep gashes where the predator's jaws had torn muscle away, the wound stretching across bone. Marika sat nearby, clutching her arm where teeth had grazed her, the skin torn and purple with swelling. Both were slipping in and out of awareness as their colleagues worked to slow the bleeding with makeshift bandages torn from their uniforms. The metallic scent of blood mixed with the salty air, leaving everyone shaken by the sudden turn of events. Emergency signals were sent immediately. A helicopter was dispatched from shore carrying paramedics and equipment needed for survival in cases of severe trauma. Minutes felt like hours as the injured lay on the deck, surrounded by worried faces. Some crew members stood frozen, staring at the dark sea where the predator had vanished, while others focused on tying cloth tightly around Peter's leg and pressing dressings onto Marika's arm. Every wave that rocked the platform served as a reminder of the danger lurking beneath. When the helicopter arrived, the medical team rushed into action. Peter was lifted onto a stretcher, his skin pale and clammy from blood loss. Intravenous lines were inserted as pressure packs were strapped around his leg. Marika, though still conscious, was also secured, her arm immobilized to prevent further damage. The helicopter blades churned the air as they were lifted away, leaving the remaining crew in stunned silence. The sight of their colleagues being carried off was a harsh reminder of how quickly routine work could collapse into disaster. At the hospital, surgeons worked tirelessly. Peter required hours of surgery to repair torn tissue and stem the flow of blood. His leg remained at risk, though doctors fought to save it. Marika's injuries, though less severe, still required multiple stitches and treatment for deep bruising along her shoulder and forearm. Their families were contacted, rushing to their sides as news spread. The event was soon reported in national outlets, sparking renewed concern about the risks faced by offshore workers in predator-rich waters. In the days that followed, the oil company launched an investigation, reviewing safety protocols and questioning whether enough measures were in place to protect divers. Marine experts explained that the noise, splashing, and movement around large structures could easily attract sharks, and once drawn, they often responded with force. Workers who had been on deck during the attack struggled with sleepless nights, replaying the scene of the massive predator striking so suddenly. Though both Peter and Marika survived, their ordeal left lasting scars. Peter faced a long recovery with uncertain prospects for returning to diving, while Marika carried the weight of fear that came with every memory of the beast's teeth grazing her skin. For the rig crew, the ocean that once seemed like a familiar workplace was now marked with a deep respect for its raw and unforgiving power. In March 2024, the icy fjords of Svalbard held a quiet yet dangerous scene as marine biologist Eric Halverson prepared for a deep dive. At 38 years old, Eric had dedicated much of his life to studying marine ecosystems in some of the harshest environments on Earth. Growing up in northern Norway, he was fascinated by the resilience of life in the Arctic seas. Years of training and countless expeditions gave him a reputation as a careful and disciplined researcher, someone who respected the unpredictable nature of the ocean. His latest project involved documenting a recently sunken research vessel believed to be home to fish and other marine life that had settled among its broken structure. That morning, the conditions were far from easy. The water temperature hovered just above freezing, and heavy currents swept through the fjords. Visibility was poor, with only faint beams from dive lights cutting through the dark green water. Eric and his partner descended slowly, each movement deliberate to conserve energy and avoid stirring too much silt from the wreck. The vessel loomed beneath them, its deck tilted at an angle, covered in seaweed and swarming with smaller fish. For Eric, this was not just another dive, but a chance to observe how quickly nature could reclaim something once built by human hands. As they explored the wreckage, Eric swam along the side railings, scanning for signs of corrosion and marine growth. The water pressed heavily against his suit, the cold biting into every joint, yet beneath the silence of the dive, something else stirred. From the shadows beyond the wreck, a massive Greenland shark began to move closer. Known for their slow pace and incredible size, these sharks often lived for centuries, scavenging whatever they could find, drawn by both the vibrations of the dive lights and the smell of fish trapped within the wreck. The predator shifted its massive body toward the divers. Eric felt the brush of something large against his fin. His heartbeat quickened as the outline of the shark became visible in the haze. It was enormous, its pale skin scarred from years of survival in the Arctic depths. The creature glided closer, showing none of the quick, violent movements of tropical predators, but its sheer size was terrifying. With one slow turn, it passed against Eric's leg and gave a sudden nip to the edge of his boot. The pressure jolted him, sending shock through his body as he realized how close he was to a catastrophic bite. Eric immediately signaled his partner, who had been scanning the opposite side of the wreck. His partner moved swiftly, raising a metal rod to press between them and the advancing predator. The shark lingered, circling with slow, deliberate movements, as though deciding whether to continue or retreat. Every second felt stretched thin as the divers floated above the broken vessel, acutely aware that one wrong movement could provoke another strike. The predator eventually veered away, slipping back into the darkness with heavy, unhurried motions. Eric's breathing was sharp and uneven as he adjusted his buoyancy, his body still trembling from the sudden contact. He and his partner began a steady ascent, leaving behind the wreck and the silent shadow that had reminded them of the risks lurking even in the most remote waters. Eric and his partner rose carefully through the dim Arctic water, each moment stretching as the shadow of the Greenland shark faded into the depths behind them. The ascent was slow, guided by instinct and discipline, yet every flicker of light in the murk reminded Eric of the massive body that had brushed his leg. When they finally surfaced, the cold air filled his lungs with relief, though the chill of fear still gripped his chest. Crew members on the boat hauled them aboard quickly, noting the tremor in Eric's hands and the pale look on his face. The small tear on his boot and the scrape on his ankle showed how close the encounter had come to being far worse. Once on deck, the shock began to settle in. Eric removed his heavy gear, his body stiff from the freezing water, and sat quietly while others inspected the equipment. The realization of how easily the predator could have inflicted catastrophic damage weighed heavily on everyone. His partner recounted the moment when the shark lingered, circling slowly, and how the metal rod had likely kept the animal at a distance long enough for them to escape. For the team, the encounter was not just a near miss, but a stark reminder of the risks they faced in these remote waters. News of the incident spread quickly among colleagues in Svalbard. Many were astonished that such a large predator had approached so boldly. Greenland sharks were often described as sluggish scavengers, but this one had shown curiosity and force, behavior that unsettled even the most seasoned experts. Fellow scientists reached out to Eric, not only to offer support, but also to gather information about the details of the dive. The fact that vibrations from the lights and the scent of fish had attracted the animal became an important discussion point, raising questions about how human activity influenced predator behavior in the Arctic. In the days that followed, Eric reviewed his notes with caution, documenting every second of the encounter. He described the sensation of the shark's skin scraping against his fin, the sudden nip at his boot, and the eerie silence that followed when it disappeared into the gloom. Each word carried the weight of someone who had come face to face with the power of a creature far larger and older than himself. His account would be added to a growing body of research about Greenland sharks, contributing knowledge while serving as a warning to others who might underestimate these deep-water predators. Emotionally, the aftermath lingered. Nights were restless, filled with images of the massive outline emerging from the shadows. Yet Eric's resolve did not waver. He continued his work more cautious than before, but with renewed respect for the animals he studied. The incident reminded him and his peers that even in the most remote frozen seas, the balance of survival was delicate, and that the ocean's guardians moved silently, watching from the depths. In August 2024, the sun burned hot over the Indian Ocean as a small seaplane carried 4 American tourists toward the Seychelles, their minds set on exploring the beauty of coral islands and clear lagoons. Among them was 28-year-old Ryan Carter, a fitness trainer from Florida with a love for travel, and 26-year-old Emily Sanders, a medical student from California who had saved for years to see these remote waters. Both were known for their adventurous spirits, drawn not only to the beaches but also to the idea of being surrounded by endless sea. Alongside them were 2 friends with similar excitement, sharing laughter as the aircraft skimmed over the surface of the shimmering waves. It was meant to be the highlight of their journey, a day where adventure met serenity far from the bustle of their lives back home. The flight started calmly, the hum of the engines steady, the ocean below glistening under the sun. Yet in the middle of this calm stretch, disaster struck. A sudden failure caused the engine to sputter violently, shaking the small plane as alarms pierced the cabin. The pilot maneuvered desperately, aiming for the only option left, a rough emergency landing in open water. The seaplane struck the waves hard, the impact throwing passengers forward as the wings clipped the surface and splintered. Spray filled the air, and the sound of tearing metal mixed with panicked breaths. Though battered, the passengers survived the crash, breaking free from the cabin and clinging to floating debris. Pieces of the wreck bobbed across the swells, forming fragile lifelines against the vast sea around them. Minor cuts and scrapes covered their arms and legs, blood mixing with salt water as waves tossed them about. The wide emptiness of the ocean stretched in every direction, leaving them exposed and vulnerable under the blazing sun. As the group struggled to gather themselves, the surface tension shifted. A shadow began circling beneath, a slow and deliberate movement that cut through the deep blue. From below, a large oceanic white-tip shark approached, drawn by the frantic splashing and faint scent of blood. Its broad fins broke the water's surface, slicing closer each second, its body coiling with energy. Then it struck. In a blur of power, the shark lunged forward, clamping its jaws onto Ryan's leg with crushing force. The water exploded into chaos as he cried out, thrashing against the predator's pull. Emily, only feet away, flailed as the shark snapped near her arm, the sound of its jaws slamming shut sending shockwaves of terror through the group. Panic erupted. The survivors grabbed at broken paddles and jagged pieces of wreckage, swinging desperately to fend it off. The predator circled again, weaving between debris, its movements slow yet menacing, reminding them that the ocean belonged to it. The struggle for survival had only begun, and with every pass the danger pressed closer, leaving them in a fight against fear, exhaustion, and a relentless hunter. The predator circled again, its wide fins cutting across the swells, while the survivors clung desperately to wreckage that rocked with every wave. Ryan's injured leg bled heavily, coloring the water in streaks that only fueled the menace circling them. Emily gripped broken debris tightly, her arm trembling from the near miss that had almost caught her as the animal had lunged. Every second dragged, the ocean stretched endlessly and silently apart from the sound of waves and the sharp thrash of the predator's tail. The group's frantic efforts with paddles and fragments of wreckage managed to push the shark back momentarily, but the shadow never left. Each pass came closer, forcing the survivors into a constant rhythm of striking at the water to keep the predator at bay. Exhaustion began to take hold, their arms growing weak, the heat of the sun beating down as salt stung their wounds. The sense of isolation was crushing, and fear deepened with each moment the rescue they hoped for failed to appear. Then, through the haze of struggle, the sound of a distant engine broke the monotony of the surf. A rescue vessel, alerted by emergency signals, cut across the horizon. The sight of it sparked fresh energy, even as the predator continued circling. Crew members leaned over the bow, spotting the scattered wreckage and the survivors waving frantically. They acted fast, hurling lines and positioning the boat close despite the danger lurking beneath. The predator made one final lunge, snapping close to Emily as she reached for a rope. Crew on deck struck the water with poles and flares, creating a barrier of noise and disturbance that forced the shark to retreat at last. The survivors were hauled aboard one by one, their bodies shaking violently from cold, shock, and pain. Ryan collapsed onto the deck, his leg wrapped swiftly in bandages as blood pooled around him. Emily's arm was bruised but intact, her breath shallow as she leaned against the crew for support. The boat sped toward land. The passengers kept glancing at the waves behind them, expecting the shadow to return. On shore, medical teams rushed them into care. Ryan's injuries required immediate surgery to repair torn muscles and vessels, while Emily endured deep bruising and cuts that needed stitching. The others were treated for exhaustion, dehydration, and minor wounds. In the days that followed, the survivors spoke little of the experience, each carrying images of the endless sea and the circling predator etched into their minds. Authorities emphasized once more the dangers of drifting in open ocean, especially near crash sites where noise and blood can quickly attract hunters. What had begun as an ordinary sightseeing flight ended as a chilling reminder of the ocean's unpredictability, its vast waters offering no mercy when survival depended on minutes. In November 2022, the waters off San Diego carried a task unlike any ordinary dive. Ethan Brooks, a 34-year-old police diver, had trained for years to handle underwater recovery in dangerous conditions. Known among his colleagues for his focus and discipline, he had taken part in many complex cases before. Growing up near the California coast, he always felt drawn to the ocean and later chose a career where his skills in diving could serve justice. His work often involved long hours in uncertain environments, but he accepted the risks as part of his responsibility. On this day, his mission was tied to a smuggling case that involved a sunken boat. With his training, equipment, and team at his side, he prepared for what seemed like a controlled dive. The morning began with calm seas and overcast skies, setting a gray tone across the water. The dive team assembled their gear, carefully checking masks, oxygen, and safety lines before dropping into the depths. The wreck rested quietly on the seabed, partly hidden by debris and swaying vegetation. It was a vessel that once served illegal purposes, now lying broken and dark below the surface. Ethan descended slowly, his lights cutting through the murk, revealing scattered nets and the shadowy shape of the sunken craft. Alongside him, fellow divers watched carefully, ensuring every step of the operation was followed. Reaching the wreck, Ethan spotted what he was tasked to recover. An evidence bag floated just within the broken shell of the boat, caught in tangled ropes. Moving with steady control, he reached toward it, his gloved hands brushing through the shifting particles that stirred fish out of hiding. The sudden motion triggered a ripple in the water, a signal that did not go unnoticed in the surrounding blue. From beyond the wreck's edge, the sleek form of a short-fin mako slid into view. Known for its speed and power, the predator circled with sharp intent, drawn closer by both the movement and the cluster of fish now darting away from the disturbance. For a moment it lingered, its outline ghostly in the dim light, before charging with startling velocity. The predator struck fast, clamping down on Ethan's forearm. The force rattled through his body as pain surged instantly. The shark shook with brutal strength, pulling him against the wreck and twisting him deeper. The sudden thrash sent clouds of sand and debris upward, blinding the area in a haze of movement. Ethan gripped a metal rod and struck again and again, but the predator's jaws held firm. The violence of the attack tangled him in a rope, momentarily trapping him as the predator dragged him lower. Panic threatened, but years of training held him steady. Nearby, his team reacted with urgency, smashing the water with poles, creating vibrations to break the predator's hold. For seconds that stretched like minutes, the struggle continued. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the mako released its grip. It twisted away and vanished into the blue, leaving blood swirling in the water around Ethan. Shaken and bleeding heavily, he kicked upward with desperate force, fighting toward the surface where the light glimmered through the waves above. The surface broke around Ethan as he rose with powerful kicks, his vision blurred by the trail of red streaming from his injured arm. Fellow divers grabbed hold of him, hauling him toward the waiting vessel. The team on deck scrambled into action, pulling him up and laying him flat across the boards, their hands pressing firmly against the wound to slow the heavy bleeding. His breathing was ragged, his body shivering from shock as seawater mixed with blood across the deck. The metal rod he had swung during the struggle lay nearby, bent from the force of repeated strikes, a silent reminder of the violent minutes that had just passed beneath the waves. The crew acted quickly, wrapping bandages around his torn forearm while signaling for emergency transport. Their voices carried urgency, knowing every second mattered as blood continued to seep through the layers of cloth. Ethan's face turned pale, his strength draining fast, but he remained conscious, clutching weakly at the edges of the stretcher they secured beneath him. The sight of shredded wetsuit fabric and the jagged punctures along his skin left no doubt about the brutality of the strike. As the boat sped toward shore, the atmosphere was tense and heavy. Each wave rocked the vessel, sending jolts of pain through Ethan's body. His team kept pressure steady on the wound while monitoring his pulse, determined to keep him stable until medical help arrived. The coastline seemed far away, every minute stretching out endlessly against the rhythm of the engine and the sound of rushing water. When they finally reached the harbor, paramedics were already waiting, rushing him onto a stretcher and into the ambulance with practiced efficiency. At the hospital, surgeons worked with precision to repair the damage. The bite had torn deep into muscle and tissue, leaving tendons bruised and nerves exposed. Hours of surgery were required to close the lacerations, clean the wounds, and restore circulation. Blood transfusions were given to replace what had been lost, and Ethan remained under close watch as he slowly stabilized. His team, gathered in the waiting area, sat in silence, shaken by how quickly routine duty had turned into near tragedy. The days that followed were filled with slow recovery. His arm remained wrapped in thick bandages, supported by splints to keep the damaged muscles still. Nurses monitored him constantly, adjusting medication to ease the pain and prevent infection. Physiotherapists began planning long sessions of rehabilitation, warning that full movement would take months of hard effort. The scars, both physical and mental, would not fade quickly. Outside the hospital, news of the attack spread, sparking debates on the dangers faced even by trained professionals. Experts explained how predators like shortfin makos respond with explosive speed when prey-like signals reach them. For Ethan, the incident became more than a case assignment. It became a defining moment of survival. Though scarred, his determination to heal reflected the same discipline that had carried him through years of service. His story was a reminder of how fragile the line is between control and chaos when humans work in the vast, unpredictable sea.